I'm going to start even though there's still people coming into the room, because there's really never enough time to talk everything that needs to be discussed about security. My name is Tudor Damien. As was said, I'm a managing partner at Avelgo. That's where we offer what we like to call peace of mind as a service. Essentially, it's managed services around mostly the Microsoft Cloud, Azure, Office 365, and things like that. I also deal with security, and I've been doing that for a while. I've been involved in a lot of community activities. If any of you have ever been to, say, IT Camp in Cluj, it's an event that's been going on for a while now. The purpose of today's talk is to try and give you a big picture over why people are moving to the cloud, how they end up there, and once they are there, what's some of the stuff that they have to deal with when it comes to security and compliance. And it's a talk that's mostly about things that people and companies know they have to do, but they rarely do. It's not going to be too much of a technical talk. It's more of a principles and approaches and overview discussion. But I honestly hope that you'll leave the room with at least some ideas or some additional ideas of how these things can get done. As I mentioned, I mostly work with the Microsoft stack of technologies, but my colleagues also deal with AWS and Google clouds as well. So a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about apply to pretty much any cloud provider or any cloud solution out there. I will have some examples in the end of how Microsoft does it. And there's equivalent examples with the other cloud providers as well. But just to give you an idea. And I'll also talk some stuff about how we handle these things and some of the challenges that we've faced. So starting with this whole new thing, right? It's digital transformation. Every company out there, everyone is doing this. And if you're not doing it, you're not cool. And there's a lot of digital transformation initiatives that we've seen with our customers so far. The reality is a bit more grim when it comes to digital transformation. So for instance, the guys over at the Wall Street Journal did a survey, and it's obvious that digital transformation is a major concern, especially for C-level people and senior executives. Yet, if we are to look at the past year alone, nearly 70% of all digital transformation initiatives failed. So it's wasted money, wasted time. It's like we want to play around with some stuff and we want to do things, and in the end, you don't end up doing the things that you started to do. You just spent a lot of money and spent a lot of time, or wasted a lot of time doing it. And you see some numbers there. The problem is that companies tend to go with the new shiny stuff because everyone else is doing it, not because I actually need it, not because it solves a business problem, but because, well, my competition's doing it, so I must be lagging behind if I'm not doing it myself. So they end up doing things that they don't need or investing in things that don't help them, instead of actually trying to figure out what it is that might help them better. So the solutions around this particular conundrum is to try and define your strategy before you start investing in anything. And that's quite rare. You try it first, and then you realize, hey, this is not for me, this is not helping me. How about we think this through the next time? Well, how about you think this through the first time? So that's one thing. A second thing is, well, we want to try something new. So it's obvious that we need to go talk to somebody who knows that. We won't work with any of our insiders. We will just go to somebody else, an external third party, and ask them to do it for us. Now, those people will have, what, 2-3 days a week to figure out 20 years worth of internal processes and business needs, the stuff that your guys, your people inside the company know much, much better. And it's very rare that we see people that actually have to deal with the internal processes that get involved in these kinds of digital transformation discussions. So try and do that more, because it's those people that know what you need and what are most of the pain points in your day-to-day processes. If you don't involve those people in your digital transformation initiatives, you'll end up just wasting money and time. Also, it's very rare that companies and even some of our customers in their initial attempts, they rarely look at what their customers actually are able to tell them. Like, ask your customer, what is it in our relationship that I could do better? How is it that I could serve you and your needs better? Because that will also tell me what I need to change internally. You always assume that you're delivering a perfect solution, and if some customer ends up leaving you, it's because they're stupid, they don't understand, we're doing a perfect job, it's them that just don't get it, we did nothing wrong. Also, when it comes to this whole move to the cloud thing, there's a lot of times that I've seen, and I've had discussions with people, especially in the IT department, well, if everything's going to move to the cloud, then what am I going to do? Are they going to fire me? It's IT, guys. It's something that you've chosen knowing full well that stuff changes. And we're at a security conference. Out of everything IT, I think security is that part that has the most changes from one day to another. If you work in development and you work on framework X, and that's like 2 versions behind, but that's the project that your customer needs you to work on. If the next version of that framework comes up today, it's okay if you don't read anything about it for 6 months. You'll be okay, you'll be fine. In security, if some particular issue or threat or vulnerability or attack or 0-day shows up today and you don't know about it, you might have to update your resume tomorrow. Right? So you are in a field where you have to learn new things. And if moving to the cloud implies you learning new things, that's what you signed up for. Like, that's IT. If you're not okay with that, if you're not okay to always be up to date, to always be learning, and you want that nice, comfy thing, then maybe IT isn't for you. And there's some aspects of the startup culture that also help with this. Even in larger companies, there's a lot that you can learn from startups, and it's stuff like rapid prototyping and fail fast kind of approaching. Now, when you look at traditional, especially enterprise infrastructures, it's a lot of stuff that gathered over the years. Most of it is old, out of date, but you still have to somehow make it work. Because companies rarely include the idea of, hey, I need to, at some point in the future, it may be 3 years, it may be 5, it may be 7, but at some point in the future, I will have someone in the company come tell me, hey, you know my 7-year-old laptop? It's a bit slow, right? You will get there. And if you haven't put the simple idea that you have to budget for hardware and software licenses and everything that you need for your business to run, and you don't put that into your business plan, and you end up being surprised every 7 years that you have to renew licenses and buy new servers and stuff, then you're not doing your business right. You're not considering all the costs that you have. And this is the kind of pain point that a lot of companies find. There's a lot of tech products that you need to choose from, a lot of demands coming from the market, and your competition is doing cool stuff, and you're not doing it, and you feel like you're missing out. So you just buy stuff for the sake of buying it because it's cool, because it sounds cool, because the marketing slides for it were cool, because the sales guy that pitched that product or service to you was they did a good job, but you end up realizing that, hey, this is not actually what I need, what I want, or what can help me. So why would you then move to the cloud, right? Why would you pick the cloud? Well, the thing is, this is not today's real question. If you look at the industry today, companies are already in the cloud. And their main concerns is, how do I move more stuff to the cloud? And how do I optimize what's already there? Because I haven't really thought things through from the very beginning. So I moved a bunch of stuff, and now I end up seeing that my invoice is 3x the amount I was expecting, or the amount the consultant told me before we moved to the cloud. So I want to optimize the costs, but I also want to move more stuff there. And that's the current trends in the industry. It's not, should I move to the cloud? Is the cloud? There's value in the cloud. You just have to figure out what that value is for you and do it right from the very beginning. So why would you do it? Or why do companies actually do it? Mainly it has to do with cost control. And this is where a lot of stuff fails from the very beginning. You just think of, hey, I want to move my cheap server from Hetzner to the cloud, be it AWS or Azure or whatever, and you end up looking at the bill at the end of the month and you say, hey, this is much more expensive. But that's because you don't actually make use of what the cloud can provide, which is that commodity thing, that being able to turn things on and off and only pay for stuff when you use them, as opposed to a server that sits under your desk or a dedicated server co-located somewhere in a data center. With the cloud, you have that turn on, turn off kind of thing, like tap water. You turn on the tap, water flows, you end up paying for it at the end of the month. When you turn off the tap, you stop paying for it, like electricity or anything that's on demand. If you can do that, if you can figure out those kinds of workloads that have an odd pattern, they work like an on and off thing. You have the application that generates your payroll. That runs once a month when you have to pay the salaries. And that's one day a month that it crunches numbers for all the employees in the company. And then for the rest of the 29, 30 days of the month, it just sits there idly or with very little resources needed. But you still allocate the same amount of hardware for the entire month, because that thing needs to be running, right? What if someone needs to generate one of the payrolls 3 days later? But if you have these kinds of workloads, you can easily scale them up and down. You can easily turn them off maybe during nights and weekends. Will there be someone generating payrolls on a Saturday at 3 a.m.? If yes, then maybe there's some other processes inside the company that you need to look at. If no, maybe you can just turn off that machine and stop paying for it. Innovation. The cloud is also the place where you find certain solutions that it's really hard to build yourself, like AI and machine learning, and different ways to work with databases and storage. Databases that spread across multiple regions and multiple data centers, and they allow you to have this distributed deployment of an application with data available in any region of the world. Building that kind of an infrastructure yourself, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it might be slightly more expensive than just paying per use to use that and have that being built by somebody else, by the cloud provider. Also, if you're just starting up as a business, it makes a lot more sense to just use software as a service as much as possible for your email, for your CRM or ERP solutions, and not have to install and configure and manage them on-prem, because you need dedicated stuff to do that, as opposed to having a SaaS solution that just is available and you pay based on the number of people in your company. And of course, and the talk that we're here today, the security and compliance side. Now the challenges around the cloud fall into a lot of categories, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but it's mostly about identity and data. Like, how do you do data classification? How do you do labeling? How do you protect your data, especially once it's in the cloud? How do you monitor and respond to threats when your stuff is in the cloud and not under your desk? How do you handle geography, like multi-geo deployments and GDPR, because that's a thing for a while now, and fines have started to come in, so that's starting to become a thing again. There was the really high panic before GDPR kicked in, and then there was silence for like a year. But now that the fines have started to come in, people are starting to ask about, so what's the deal with this GDPR thing again? What is it that we need to do not to get that fine that the other guys got? Then you have to look at the financials, like operating expenditure or capital expenditure, understanding billing models, or what are your constants and variables when it comes to cloud consumption. And you need to apply the relevant tools to be able to see that, to have that transparently visible to you. And then there's a governance discussion, which is a whole thing in itself. Any cloud subscription can and will and does get very messy unless you have proper governance from the get-go. You start giving people access to, hey, just use that cloud subscription and create whatever you want. Just make sure to maybe delete it when you're done. The maybe deleted when you're done part, people usually forget. If it's not their credit card on file, people usually forget. The guy that ends up paying the bill at the end of the month, he'll notice. He'll notice that huge SQL Server machine that you tested for 2 hours and left running for a month. He'll see it on the bill. And then there's processes and the way that you change those internally. Now, moving to the cloud is usually a matter of just doing an assessment. What is it that I want to do? What is it that I want to move and why? And then you need to figure out how you do it. And once you're there, you have to look at maybe potentially optimizing stuff once it's there. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the R's of migration. You've probably heard about most, so some hands. So this is a way to look at how do I move stuff to the cloud. Like rehost, it's just lift and shift. You get your virtual machine from on-prem, you move it to the cloud. You don't make any changes. Probably it's going to get another IP. But that's it. It just runs. Refactor is when you may have to make some small changes to your application, to your workload, to make it work in the cloud or make it work better for you. Like, for instance, you're not using SQL Server in a dedicated virtual machine. You're using SQL as a service in the cloud, right? It's just a matter of changing that connection string inside your application and somehow migrating or importing the database somewhere else. But it's a minor change. Revising usually involves extensive modifications to the code in order to be able to deploy it in an environment that needs to scale horizontally or vertically. If like you have an application that has stateful sessions, it's going to be hard to scale that horizontally and have servers pop in and out. If you have it stateless and you find another way to keep the state somewhere else, the moment a server goes down, it doesn't take all the sessions running there on the web server with it. So you might have to make some modifications to account for this new architecture. Rebuilding is actually doing it from scratch. You've thought about this architecture 10, 15 years ago. It might not be cloud ready. So you might have to just do it from scratch. That's a solution in some cases. Or you might have to just replace it. Just switch that local Exchange server, for instance, with Office 365, just to give an example. It's still Exchange, but it's somebody else managing it, right? So you just replace it with a SaaS solution. Or in some other cases, you might just realize, I don't need this anymore. I really don't. There's better alternatives out there. I will just let this app, let this workload, let this solution drop and just move to whatever I need. Now, when you get to the cloud, people think, well, I've moved to the cloud, so now the cloud provider manages some stuff for me, so I don't have to bother anymore. That's not true. You still have to bother about some things. And you can see that in some cases, those things, based on where you are, whether it's infrastructure, platform, or software as a service, it may vary by service type. What you need to do, what the cloud provider needs to do, what you need to work on together. And there's some stuff that you still have 100% control and responsibility over. Like how you do your data classification and governance, and how do you manage your endpoint protection for the clients, for the devices, for the laptops, for the phones that connect to the stuff in the cloud, that's still on you. You might use cloud solutions for that, but that's still on you. And there's a bunch of triggers that end up causing customers and people to move to the cloud. I'm not going to go into all of these, but there's a lot of different reasons on why you want to move to the cloud and why you might want to move to the cloud now instead of next year. Once you figure out that, hey, I have to move to the cloud, you figure that, hey, when I want to go deeper, things start to get more fun. Like things like applications, those are a lot more interesting than just moving servers around. Because changing like revising, re-architecting an application usually means you have to deal with some of the stuff on the slide. And you have to deal with them because they show up in the cloud and they might not have been relevant when that application was running on a single server where you solve the performance issue by just throwing more hardware at the server. The app is slow. Just add another stick of RAM. Just change the CPU. Now it's fast again. It's not the developer's problem. No, the code is perfect. It's the hardware that's at fault. So just add more hardware. Performance issues fixed. When you go to the cloud, there's a whole bunch of stuff that people just fail to look at. Now, when it comes to the security and compliance side of things, by getting to the cloud, this is where things get a lot more complicated, and people and companies usually shy away from that. Like, I don't want to have this discussion today. Like, maybe tomorrow, maybe if we find time for it at some point in the future and the budget for it, maybe. But let's just discuss how we get stuff there, and then maybe we'll discuss security. Now, when it comes to security controls, just like before, there's a lot of things that you still need to account for that you will have to handle. Anything dealing with your security strategy, your data governance, that's still on you, regardless of what sort of cloud solutions you use. You do everything on-prem, but in the cloud, you still have to do a whole bunch of these things. Anything involving defending against loss of control, that's still on you. Anything protecting your data, because it's your data, it's not the cloud provider's job to protect your data. How you do it, it's still your job. Whether it's under your desk or it's in the cloud, you still have to care about that and figure things out. How do you use, maybe you can use some of the stuff that the cloud provider gives you to make your life easier. User identity, device security, just the same. And then when you go into the platform and infrastructure as a service, you still have the application security and the network side of things. And in the infrastructure as a service side, whether the VM is in your data center or it's in the cloud, you still have to do the patching, the monitoring for any security issues, right? How many of you are familiar with GRC? All right, so that's about 5% of the room. That's good. I mean, you're here to learn about new stuff, so hopefully you'll hear about at least some new stuff. GRC is that combination of governance, risk management, and compliance. It's part of those things that you should be doing, but you rarely do, or you rarely do properly. The goals of GRC is to help ensure that any organization meets its business objectives. And more often than not, it has to do with technology. There's very few companies out there that don't need technology. At least, even if it's just the website and your email address, you still have to work with technology, and it might be an essential part of your business. How many of you would say that my business would be affected if my email was down for 1 day? Okay, 1 week? 1 month? Oh, wow, there's a lot of people not using email in the room. Or a lot of people just too lazy to raise their hands. So there's some components, some technology out there that's critical to you and running your business. The goals of GRC is to try and keep the risk at an acceptable level, make sure that those things are available, Make sure you comply to any laws and regulations, especially with the way they change. And you have to make sure that you protect both your data and the customer's data. Otherwise, you'll get fines, right, with GDPR. Now, when you look at the items that are in focus with GRC, usually it's stuff around regulatory compliance. Whether you're doing payment processing or you're working with the healthcare industry in the US, there's something out there that requires you to go through certain steps and validations to ensure that, hey, you're doing a good job here. There's also data governance, anything dealing with data loss prevention, encrypting any personally identifiable information and things like that. Financial governance, making sure you don't overspend, making sure you're still in business next year. Change management, and that's where things like DevOps come in and making efforts to ensure organizational readiness, doing trainings. Like, you don't just go in one day and tell people, hey, you know what, starting today, we are not using solution X, we're using solution Y. Good luck. And if you're not productive the next week, it's your problem, it's on you, it's not on us. We just changed it to this new shiny thing that's supposed to do things a lot better, but you're not training your people to actually use that. And there's a lot of governance, IT framework that could help you, like ITIL and COBIT. Now, the traditional approach when it comes to the cloud usually involves this somewhat of a conflict. Like, you do development, and that's not just software development, but just developing your solutions or implementing your solutions. And you want these things to be able to be deployed as fast as possible. You want, if possible, instant production access. You want these to just flow smoothly whenever there's a change. You want it on the website today, or the marketing team wants it on the website today. So you want those rapid releases. But then there's the IT guys, the bad guys, the guys that say no. Right? Whenever you ask for something, that nah, not a new server, not today, maybe next week. Wait. So they're usually the guys that you go to when you need something, and they're the guys telling you no, right? Because they have some policies, and they have to deal with security, and you're not going to deal with security. It's not your problem. So, and you don't care about the cost. You just want that thing today. So there's a conflict here. And it's all about the speed and controls kind of things. And I mentioned I might be giving some examples around Azure. So the way Azure solves this is they started implementing things that can help you get both the speed and control. Things like using blueprints and templates and policies that are predefined, doing cost management, so that you can do all those things as fast as possible, but still have that level of control. And just to give you an example here, usually when developers or the ops team comes, they go to the cloud custodian. Whoever that is, it may be a department, it may be a person, but they need to ask for more stuff in the cloud. And that's usually something that will be visible on the bill at the end of the month. So they have to ask for that. And the cloud custodian says, hold on, we need to assess, we need to evaluate, we need to compute the costs, and when we say it's okay, we'll let you do it. Right? And that's the more traditional approach. With something that's implemented as a process, you have these controls, these kinds of controls built in that you can tweak so that you can say, hey, I want to let my people deploy stuff, but everyone will have this sort of a quota. They will only be able to deploy in these regions. They will only be able to deploy these workloads and this many workloads, and anything that goes above that, come to me. But just let them do some of it that I might say yes eventually, or even better, start planning ahead and saying, hey, I want to be able to allow people to do these things they do today and these extra things anytime they want. And they don't have to ask my permission to do it because we've already budgeted that. And we'll make sure that they're within the budget because we have the controls in place to ensure that they don't go over budget. So it's these kinds of things that you need to look at, and how do I implement that? How does my cloud provider allow me to implement these kinds of things to make my life easier? Then there's what's called third and fourth party risk. Right? With the cloud, customers are usually responsible for implementing security in the actual application that they deploy. The SaaS providers, they're responsible for security in the cloud, and the cloud providers, they handle the security off the cloud. And they themselves have third-party auditors and maybe some outsourced support department in India answering to your tickets. And they get to handle your data for the application that you're building for a customer. So there's a lot of stuff involved here that you need to account for when making that move. It's no longer under your desk. You're involving some third and fourth parties into the mix, and you have to make sure that they can handle what you throw at them, and you can do it in a framework that's clear from a cost standpoint, from a legal standpoint, from a compliance standpoint, and all of that stuff. So just analyzing the costs and benefits of the cloud migration, that's also a thing, and ensuring that once you're there, you have the insight that you need. Building that strategy, as sort of like a summary to this section, is really about understanding your business challenges. Now, I've insisted on this a number of times so far, and if it's not clear now it's on the slide, so you'll get the slides. It's thinking about whether this thing actually solves my problem. Does it help me? It's not it helped somebody else, so it must help me. That's the wrong way to go. That's the digital transformation that we talked about in the very beginning. Make sure that whenever you think about this, your defense approach is data-centric. Think about your data. That's the essential stuff. Regardless of how it's stored, how it's handled, how it's processed, it's still your data and your workloads. So think about those things first. And how do you protect them? How do you move them from one place to another? What's the degree of lock-in that you have once you move? How easy can you come back? Things like that. You have to handle this from a proactive standpoint, especially when it comes to risk management. And this is the stuff that, yes, I know, but it's expensive, it takes time, and it doesn't provide any real, immediate, tangible benefits most times. So companies end up avoiding this until it's sometimes too late. I know we have to do backups, but maybe tomorrow, maybe some other time, maybe we don't need it. Maybe we're not going to be the unlucky ones. Maybe. And then when that thing happens, that's when you realize, oh yeah, well, we should have done this from the very beginning. So this is just about avoiding that, right? And ensuring that continuous approach when it comes to security and compliance. And once you understand those needs, once you understand your RTO and RPO, your desired RTO and RPO, then you can build your strategy around that. And you have to make sure that you resolve that business challenge that you've just identified. Because in some cases, regardless of what Amazon and Microsoft and Google tell you, in some cases, the cloud is not the answer. In some cases, it makes sense for you to keep stuff on-prem, whether it's compliance, whether it's latency, whether it's some other reason. In some cases, the cloud is not the answer. So from my perspective, it's not that the cloud is the future. The future is hybrid. Right now, the future is a mix of stuff that you can run and can move to the cloud, and that makes sense, and some stuff that will keep running on-prem. It could be until you migrate it, or it could be forever, or it could be until you don't need it anymore. But it's going to be something hybrid. And more often than not, moving to the cloud, it's not something that a lot of customers ask for. So can we do this next Saturday from 2 to 3 a.m.? Right? Can we move 1,000 VMs and 2,000 users next weekend? You might be able to tell that that's not usually the case. So there's going to be some time interval when you have stuff running in both sides. When you start resolving that business challenge, you have to secure the data, not the cloud. That's somebody else's problem. And we'll talk in a bit about how that problem is handled. You have to manage that risk proactively, like I said, and you have to implement that foundational security, and the starting point needs to be well thought of. You can still change that. It's fine. It doesn't have to be the perfect solution from the very beginning. But it has to be something. There's a saying that I like using: better done than perfect. Because if you'll just wait until you figure everything out, it might be too late, or it might be too costly, or it might take too long, or it might be all of the above. And just to give you an example of how some of these things that I've discussed about are handled, like I mentioned, we mostly deal with customers doing stuff in the Microsoft Cloud, in Azure and Office 365. When it comes to Azure, for one, from a compliance standpoint, they are like probably the most compliant cloud provider out there. They were the first to get a lot of these things up there as audits, external audits, saying that, hey, these guys are doing a good job protecting your data a certain way. And it usually has to do with global or industry vertical specific kind of compliances and certifications. Some of you might be familiar or might actually be working for a company that has 1 or 2 or 3 of these. Right? If you need this, you will need it whether the data stays with you or in the cloud. So you need that cloud provider to be able to provide at least the same amount of trust and confidence and stuff that's verified by a third party and audited that you can check. So any of these things, if you move to the Microsoft Cloud, any of these things you can download the report for. It will tell you who did it, when, what they found about any of their services. So these are available. When it comes to physical security, how many of you have data in a physical data center somewhere, whether it's privately owned or it's co-located? Right? So there's a bunch of you. Now, looking at the things on the slide, and I'm not sure how much stuff you see in the back, how is access handled to that data center? Have you ever been to the data center that you have data in? Right? So most of them have, right? Access approval. Who gets in? Does anyone who gets in go through a background check? Is there a system check of any kind? How do you handle perimeter security, like fencing and gates and video and stuff like that? How do you handle access to the building? Do you use biometrics like palm scans and retinal scans and things like that? Do you have guards? Like in some cases, and I've been to data centers that have guards with guns around. Right? I used to have a customer in Florida, in Miami, and they had some servers co-located in, I think it's Napa of the Americas, Terramark. It's the data center that connects South America to North America, and about 80% of the traffic between the two goes through that. And I think back then it was 7 out of the 11 backbone providers of the internet connected there. So if the internet didn't work in that data center, it meant the internet wasn't working, basically. So besides all the physical security and protection to tornadoes and things like that, it took us about 15 minutes to get to the data center from where we were staying, and about 30 minutes to get to our rack, because of all the security controls and all the processes that we had to undergo. And once we were there, that's where the US government, VeriSign, Google, and others had their servers as well. So once you got into the room and you got to your rack, you could see at about this high, there were platforms all around with guys with semi-automated guns patrolling and looking at you, whether you use your key for the right rack, right? So if you have that, then yes, your data is secure. If you have all of this stuff underneath your desk, then yes, your email is more secure there, and you don't have to bother about, I might want to move to the cloud, because you have that, right? And it costs next to nothing. When it comes to infrastructure, This is some of the stuff that the cloud provider does for you. And it's not just Azure. Most of the others do most of the same things, they just call them different names. And in some cases, they call them different names that are so different from anything that you've ever worked on that if you don't know what you search for, you will not know where you can find the containers or the VMs or the networking or the identity because it's called some fancy name. But most of these things, the cloud providers end up doing for you. If you do these things yourself, in your network, in your infrastructure, again, you can claim at any time of day, yes, I am safe. I am as safe as the cloud, right? So I can still keep my data here. Networking, just the same, as long as you do some of these things or all of these things, then you can sleep better at night knowing that, hey, you know, these guys, the Microsoft guys, they're doing a shitty job with security in their data center. They should come and I'll teach them how security is really done, right? And there's also data security, and these are some of the most specific solutions that Microsoft does provide, like role-based access control and the transparent data encryption or always encrypted settings in SQL Server, or their key management systems. Other cloud providers have their own. This one's called Key Vault. So you need to have something similar, and in most cases you do. Most cases, by most cases I mean Amazon, right? Because when it comes to the range of offerings, if you look at the big three providers, Google is still behind on a lot of things. They're ahead on some others, but they're the ones that don't have a wide an offering as Amazon and Microsoft do. But where they have them, they're quite the same. It's like 10 years ago, people were discussing what hypervisor is the best, the fastest, and that's no longer the case. If you compare performance on a hypervisor and you see 50% differences, then that's a problem. That's not been a problem for a number of years now. It's the same with the cloud. You have equivalent solutions with other providers as well. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but this, you can find, there's a link up there, aka.ms/MCRA, the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture. This is something that they put out every now and then, showing how all their products end up working together from a security standpoint. So you just need that link up there, and you'll get the latest version from there. The way it works is they give you this, and this might be overwhelming at first, so they have a version that goes like step by step. Like you start with your on-prem data center, and you've got some servers there, some intranet and extranet. You've got some clients that you need to manage, like the OSs and devices. Then maybe you've got your security operating center with your SIEM solution and some automation. Maybe you do some DLP, right? And maybe you handle your information, your identity with Active Directory, and probably you're using something like Dropbox or Google or Salesforce or Box or Office 365 as a third-party software as a service thing. And probably you have some IoT. So this is where you start. And this is where they start showing you how their stuff comes in. Hybrid, right? It's in the middle of the slide. I told you the stuff about hybrid. You think about, hey, let's do this with Azure. So how do you do it? Well, you look at things like Compliance Manager and SDL and the Trust Center. That's where you find all the reports for the compliance that I told you about. Then you start using some stuff around Azure Firewall and some security appliances, and you build things into the security center, and there's more stuff that can help you there. Then you look at having stuff on-prem, like using the latest version of Windows Server that has some security features and using Windows 10 that has some features as well that can help. Then you build your privileged access workstation access to ensure that stuff goes there. Then you maybe extend your identity into Azure AD, and you have a bunch of stuff there. You handle that through conditional access to connect to stuff. And then you keep adding, and again, You can study everything on the slide. When you get this, when you download this, has a hover thing that takes you to a link somewhere, so you can find out more about all of that. Then when it comes to Office 365, you've got a bunch of stuff going on there. It's really well worth looking into. So that's the link that you can find it at. Amazon, as far as I know, they've tried to do something similar, and I don't think they did a good of a job as this, to just give you that one single pane of glass view for their entire offering. Now, when it comes, and I'm just going to spend like 2 more minutes, when it comes to how do we do it, how do we handle this, because it's a challenge that we see with a lot of our customers. For us, it was an iterative process. For us, it took us a number of years, actually, to reach what we now have as an internal process that goes through several stages in helping customers get to the cloud. And out of the stuff that I told you about, this is where it fits. Like, you have the cloud strategy, that you help the customer build that cloud strategy from the very beginning. We don't do anything without going through that first, and then once we figure that thing out, we figure what we need to move and how we need to move it. This is usually more of a one-time project kind of thing. The strategy part is ongoing, but then everything else is, you only move things once, usually, if you do it right and if you think about it right. But once you're there, there's that part that we call peace of mind as a service, which is mostly about proactive support and optimizations and all the stuff that, yes, you know you have to do, but you rarely do it, because more often than not, the business of our customers is not cloud. It's something else, and the cloud just helps them. So since this is not your main business and your main concern, yes, you don't have to bother about this yourself, but you have to find someone who can bother about this for you. So it's not okay to not bother about it at all and just let it go. And then there's ways to find out about how do we build in new solutions, new technologies, new workloads, and how do we build upon what you've found. There's a lot of similar things out there that can help you, but the important thing is you have to have sort of this vision initially that tells you, this is how I want to do things. And you don't take the first step until you've at least cleared out some of the questions and some of the things that you know you might want to fix or address or implement or improve, and then you start working. Now, wrapping up, we briefly discussed about why, when, and how to move to the cloud, some of the concerns that companies and people face once they're there, and we've gone through some examples of like how Azure does it, for instance, when it comes to physical security and some of the solutions there. If there's something that I want you to leave the room today with, the first step, ensure you have a clear cloud strategy before you do anything. And that includes security and governance, but that's part of the bigger strategy, right? It's not just, hey, now I have to deal with security. It's something separate from everything else. It's not. It's embedded in everything else. And you need to address it and treat it as such. Then you have to discover what you've got right now and where you're actually starting from, right? And don't forget, most of the times you're just extending whatever it is you do now to the cloud. So if you're doing a poor job right now, you will be doing a poor job right now both on-prem and in the cloud. That's not going to change unless you change something about it. And it's going to be in both places. If it's a mess right now, the cloud is not going to fix that for you. The cloud is not going to fix your mess. You have to fix your mess, and ideally before you move to the cloud. And then you have to consider all the details, all the fine prints about costs and geographies and financials and identity management and things like that. So I still have, I think, 2 minutes for questions. 1, 2 questions.
So, right, yeah, that was an intense knowledge transfer from Tudor. Thank you so much.
I will take my computer off so the next speaker can...
Yeah, We will still have time to take 2 questions
Right.
because we need to allow to our next guest to get prepared and to present his things. So let's see who is. Yeah, I see a hand there. And the second hand is here.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, your presentation was almost all about the fact that cloud solutions in most cases are more secure than on-prem solutions.
Yes.
And I perfectly agree with that. The problem is I work as a consultant and my typical customer doesn't agree with that. And that's because he's simply afraid of losing control on the data, because my data center may be ANSI. For sure, it's not secure as a cloud data center, but it's mine. I have control on my stuff. And what would you say to a customer or a partner or someone that want to be sure to have the same kind of control on their data when moving to the cloud? Maybe proposing some technical solution or something.
Yeah, so I would start by actually trying to find what it is that I'm trying to fix for them. If they don't have a problem right now with security and they're okay with that, and it's going to be hard for me to convince them otherwise, it's like trying to force the old lady to cross the street, right? You don't want that. You want to help them fix something. And in most cases, this can be a little thing. Let's not move everything to the cloud. Let's just do this pilot. Let me show you. Let me do a one-day training to show you how the cloud works, and then let's take the least critical of your workloads and have your people move it to the cloud just to see how easy it is. And once it's there, just let it run for 2 weeks, and you'll see that you're still in control, the data is still yours. So it's all about baby steps, and it's about identifying an actual problem that you can solve for the customer. That's how you gain their trust. And you can do it gradually. If you want to do everything from the very beginning, yeah, you have to move everything to the cloud, you're doing it wrong because of that very reason, because they still don't trust the cloud and security, and I feel it's safer if it's under my desk. But starting with the small steps, they'll gain that trust, and it's going to be easier and easier to move more and more stuff. And during that time, it'll be hybrid, right? So I guess one more question.
Thank you for your presentation.
All right.
When you are dealing with clients with regards to security, does it ever happen that you are in conflict with internal teams? And
oh yes. And not only that, but more often than not, we're the ones doing, well, I hate to say it, but it's sort of like herding cats. Right? It's having to deal with multiple internal departments that don't usually talk to one another themselves, and you have to make them talk to one another, and you have to make them all talk to you, and you have to make them understand why this will help them and this will help them. Usually it's IT and development. And they hate each other more often than not. And when you want to implement, for instance, CI/CD solutions, right? Continuous integration, continuous delivery. That's a lot of DevOps. That's a lot of developers working with infrastructure guys to make something work together, right? So yes, there's challenges around that. It doesn't have to do with technology. Unfortunately, it has to do with your people skills and your ability to talk to people and understand their problems and help them fix it. And there's no magical solution or technology out there that will save you from this. This is and will forever be an uncomfortable position to be in, but you have to assume that. You have to assume that this will happen, and you have to just go with that, because it will happen. And in a lot of cases, it's hard to make the customer understand that they need this. You'll be the one doing it for them, or just doing that initial change. So in a lot of cases, a cloud migration project ends up being something that transforms their internal business processes. Just because they move something to the cloud means at the end of this, they are doing things differently internally. They communicate differently. They handle things differently. And it's part of that. And as long as you understand that it's not just about technology, that it's also about cultural transformation and governance and things like internal processes, then that's when you can just go all in. But it's more than just offering the right technology and making sure that they understand and they get it and they accept it.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Tudor, for an awesome talk.